Hello, everybody, on this very warm, hot California week. We have about 2 more minutes before we get started on Rewiring Change, a neuroscience-backed approach to leading transformation. So I hope you've been enjoying the series. I know that it's been a lot of fun breaking Kotter steps down and into more practical, digestible nuggets. It's something that we definitely enjoy doing, making things simpler, not harder, and accessible in terms of understanding for everybody who joins us. So, with that said, I'll give it about a minute or so. I think we're just about a minute shy from the starting point. I want to give everybody some time to arrive, but if you could let me know in chat, let me know if you could see the screen okay, the slideshow, and if you can hear me okay. I did some minor tech adjustments right before we got started. So if you could just tell me, yes, like we hear you in chat, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Well, we're at 10 o'clock. So let's get this show on the road. We like to keep things nice and short and sweet. We're mindful of your time. So if you don't know who we are, we're Management Cues. We're a training company and we train in areas of leadership and management. What makes us unique is that we have a neuroscience-backed approach. We've had neuroengineers and neuroscientists test what we do. And so we have proven results that how we do the training, how we look at the individual experience around learning, that all of that makes a difference in terms of actual measurable results, which we are all too fascinated with and excited to provide to the teams that we work with. So, hi, everyone. In case you haven't met me before, I am Dr. Mayra Austin. I'm all too happy to be here with you. It's been a hot week, but it's been a really great learning week. So we've done a lot of learning. We've worked a lot with clients this week. And so we have that kind of energy buzzing around us this week. So for week 4, we're talking about reinforcing success and creating momentum through short-term wins. So the reason this is so important and why it's in line with the framework that Kotter put out there is because sometimes we take these steps for granted, and it's the steps that are necessary to activate momentum within each individual person on our team. So it's an interesting concept, right? That things that maybe we don't think are huge wins or deserve celebration, other people actually are getting a boost of energy around that. And so we'll talk about the neuroscience connection, where managers go wrong when it comes to short-term wins, because there are things that managers do that sometimes get in their own way. We'll talk about Kotter's step 6. We'll give you some management strategies, and of course, you'll get your management tool for registering and attending for today. So when change is happening and when we're pushing for change as managers, when we're getting the push from, senior leadership or executive leadership, and they're saying, we need to get this done, we need to get everybody on board. I mean, those are common phrases that I've heard in my career, across decades. The reality is that the manager has to understand how to activate, because they can't actually just push it through the change or the buy-in or the energy or the bigger picture. Those kinds of things have to kind of be embedded in what you're doing, and you have to have an understanding of it. So as a manager today, I want you to start by asking yourself, what evidence can we show our team that tells them this change is working? So there's a couple of things that I see in the workforce with managers and managing a change or being introduced to a change. They run with it because the leaders are saying this is where we need to go, and that's kind of the end of the thought process around it. They force or try to use authority to push the change, and the explanation when asked questions around why it's the approach, why it's effective, why we're doing it now, is just the answer is simply because that's what the leaders want. And it's such a poor way of really understanding what's happening to the person across the way in terms of trying to digest the change. So short-term wins play a role in that. Understanding short-term wins can help the brain of the team member and the manager experience progress rather than perceiving change as an endless threat. Like we've mentioned in prior sessions, when we don't do the framing, when we don't set up the teams, when we don't design the vision on how we're going to provide those kind of stepping stones for people, then it's just simply threat. Even if the change is good for us, it doesn't matter. The brain does not work automatically in that way when it's confronted with something that is different, that is not predictable. And from a neuroscience standpoint, this is a connection. And it's such an important connection because I think once we all understand it, we tend to approach everything different. A conversation, a strategy, an initiative, our conversation with executive leadership or whoever we report to, it tends to be more dialed in, more specific, and for sure, way more impactful. So during prolonged change, when we're implementing something like a new system that people are going to use, right? Uncertainty is answered by the question of explaining what is happening and walking people through it. Threat perception, to mitigate that, to work against that, you have to answer, what does this mean for them, right? How does this impact them positively, and where's the proof? Change fatigue happens when it's a long-term change, right? So how long is this going to last? Giving people a cadence, a timeline, a check-in. Those are all things that help the brain understand why this is worthwhile. Reduced motivation. We have to answer the question, is this actually working, or did we think it was going to work and then it didn't? And then I'll talk a little bit about what to do in that instance when the change is actually not productive, not effective, and you need to keep people on board, because that happens. Projects fail. And so short-term wins provide evidence that the effort is producing results. And you need to not just get superficial buy-in, you actually need to get the buy-in of each person's brain for it to actually be effective. So you have to remember, for the human brain, not knowing, the absence of predictability, the absence of stability is exhausting for the brain. So evidence matters because uncertainty, it burns us out. So if you have felt burnt out during a change, I think it is a good thing to ask why. Why do you feel the burnout in relation to that change? So when people see progress, leaders can begin shifting the narrative from we're being asked to change, which feels forceful, feels controlling, doesn't feel genuine, to we're changing and it's working. That's such a different disposition that really creates productivity within the change because there's momentum and something positive is happening. So that distinction is huge. That completely changes how you handle and live through a change. And those things make a significant difference. And so Kotter step 6, generating short-term wins. I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes as managers, we get in our own way. I can remember doing it when I was a less experienced manager. I can remember training and development, so many different managers at different stages, and them not understanding the power of the win, right? And part of it was because that's not what they had learned. It was not the example they were given. They didn't have any neuroscience understanding, or how to generate this type of momentum through a natural connection, or just simply how we communicate. So what Kotter means by generating short-term wins. So in his framework, what he's referring to is demonstrating progress and building credibility for change. Just throwing change on somebody and telling them it's going to be good for them, telling them that it's going to be easier, that's just not enough. We're non-believers at that point, right? We're just going with the flow because there's an authoritative relationship and we have to do what we're told. And what we need for things to actually work is actually kind of the intrinsic buy-in, right? The buy-in from the inside out, not the outside in. Anybody can nod yes. That doesn't mean that they're into it. That doesn't mean they understand it. That doesn't mean they're actually championing it. And so we have to make these distinctions in practice. So why does this step matter? The acknowledging of the small wins, it's so important because this is how we introduce momentum during change. Big organizational transformation can take months. Sometimes it takes years. You need to understand, both as a leader and a manager, how momentum works and what it does for you. Because it definitely, once it's there, it actually makes your job easier. So do we want to make our job easier for ourselves, or do we want to make it harder? Do we want to check the box, or do we want to create impact? These are all distinctions that as leaders and managers we have to make, right? Do we want to just get a paycheck, or do we want to move up the ladder, grow, and, have different goals around our growth? That's a choice. You have to decide how to get there, right? And so people need evidence that this change, that it actually works. So what qualifies as a short-term win? Another area that I've seen come up pretty frequently is that we don't actually know what to call a short-term win and how to distinguish it from a big win. I mean, of course, I always mention this. These are the areas that I choose to train on are areas that I myself never saw training on, not to this degree, not in this way. And so I decided to produce it with my team through management cues. So here's what qualifies as a short-term win. It's visible, it means something, so it's meaningful, it's measurable, and it's connected to the change. And I'm going to continue to dive into the example, right? So here are some examples in a project, right? And so some of these I'm sure you'll recognize because they happen over and over as we manage projects and change and people. A new process that reduces approval time by 20%. Anything that you're doing that's going to reduce or increase any of the parameters that matter to our business, that's a great small win because everybody could see it. It's objective. It's not subjective. It's not opinion. It's not assumption. And you can showcase it and highlight it. And you know who's involved in creating that difference. Managers complete a new leadership training. These are development milestones. Not only do they mean something to people if you acknowledge them, but you're showing the path. You're showing that you're creating a path. People aren't just floating in your environment hoping that they get better at something, right? Customer complaints decrease. Again, quantifiable metric. We know who's involved, a very small thing, but it's working. A new technology adoption target that is reached. And for this, again, if you're intentional with your vision and you design project management and change management around it, you can design your milestone. You could say the first change milestone is that everybody gets trained. Okay, once everybody is trained, that's a milestone, celebrate it. And it's aligned with progress, right? So it's not superficial, it's not fake, it's not lip service. A team successfully pilots a new workflow. They're able to manage the whole workflow from A through Z without any mistakes. That's a milestone. Celebrate that. Employee participation increases. Again, tie an exact percentage to that because you know who's involved. You know what the decrease or increase was along the way. It doesn't have to be 100. It could be 2%. It's still an increase. It's still progress, right? And it's again, showing us the way, giving us a path. A problematic process that is eliminated. A bottleneck was identified, it was addressed, we worked it out, we fixed it, it's no longer a problem. Celebrate that, right? These are things that we do that do something to in terms of momentum for people. So here's a caution. And I've seen this done wrong so many times when it comes to the wins. And that's what people give up on the wins because they did it wrong to begin with. They didn't get an outcome. And so they think it's not worth doing. So here's the reality. Do not fake it. Do not manufacture wins. It has to be aligned and measurable, and it has to make sense, and it has to be clear who that win is celebrating. If leaders celebrate meaningless metrics while employees are experiencing failure, people lose trust. Again, if it doesn't show progress, if it doesn't show growth, if it's not related to what you're doing in terms of that change, there's a disconnect that you're creating. You're actually feeding the wrong thing. So the win needs to be real. It has got to be relevant to that change. And here are some of the things, right? What makes a great short-term win or a good short-term win? A strong win should be visible. People can see the progress. It should be meaningful. It should connect people to things that they care about, not things that you care about, not things that the company cares about, things that they care about. right? Achievable. It can be realistically happening within a relatively short period of time. So it's relevant to the here and now, not 5 years from now, not 5 years ago. That doesn't create momentum, even though it's worth acknowledging, right? It has to be relevant. It demonstrates that the change is actually working. If you're trying to build momentum around that change, it has to be specific to that. It has to be celebrated. Leadership acknowledges the accomplishment. The entire leadership team should be briefed on what this does and why you're doing it and what it's showing us, right? It's showing us we're moving the needle. Sometimes we focus on just end results and we don't show the needle moving along the way. To me, that is a huge miss with people. This is how you show them that it matters. So here's an example. Imagine an organization implementing a new technology system. Instead of waiting 6 months to determine whether the implementation was successful, in week 2, 80% of the employees completed the training. We celebrate that. In week 4, the first department successfully transitioned. We celebrate that. In week 6, error rates started to decrease by 15%. That's a great moment to celebrate. Week 8, employees report increased confidence using the system. Right? So do you see how the momentum is there along the entire way? This change is worth it. This change merits our attention. And hey, by the way, we're getting some attention around it too. And so each becomes a short-term win that people connect with. It makes sense to them. It's about them, right? It's about their success. And the brain responds to that. When it's about you, just like we respond to self-preservation, when we get excited and we're celebrated, we respond too. So where managers become critical, managers can create momentum by asking, what evidence can we show our team that tells them the change is working? So again, don't focus so much on the end result, also capture the journey. The next step for managers at that point, once they ask that question, have some facts around that question, is to identify the right things. And so the right things are what has changed, what has improved, who contributed, what did we learn, what should we celebrate, what's the next achievable win. And so this is creating intentional momentum. It also, from a management perspective, shows that you understand the behavior behind what needs to happen. Because it cannot be forced, it cannot be willed, it can't even be wished. It won't work, right? So what happens when there are no wins? And understanding change. So when we're introducing change, not all change is successful, right? I'm very practical, very direct, an operator at heart, like I've mentioned before. Sometimes plans don't work for multiple reasons. And so what do we do at that point then with this change? Well, here's what you should do as a manager, right? Because it's not just, oh, it didn't work. You lift your hands up and then it's out to the trash. That's not how it works, right? So this is an opportunity like anything else. So here's what you should do instead. Be honest about the lack of evidence. If you're looking at the journey towards change or through change, and you start to see that the change is actually not a good one, you need to document it, diagnose what's happening, look for what may be causing that kind of fail or that setback or why it's ineffective. Create a smaller experiment, and I'll talk about what that means. Treat failure as information, not as a personal flaw. Okay. I've seen a lot of managers be very hard on themselves because they feel like they failed, when really once I broke down what was happening, the change itself was not a good fit for what you were trying to achieve as an organization. So again, being strategic means not getting stuck in this cup of water, right? Drowning in a cup of water. So don't reward the wrong behavior. So let's break those down a little bit. So be honest about the lack of evidence. So say you need to say to your team and to your leaders, we don't have the results we expected yet. Here's what we have. Credibility is more important than a false positive, right? And so you need to build that trust with your team and that credibility. This is how you do it in moments that we're not succeeding in. Diagnose before celebrating. So again, look at, what did we expect to improve? What actually happened? So did our forecast fall short? Was there something we weren't aware of? Was there a new variable? Was there a shortage in resources? All these things happen during projects that include change. What isn't working? Is the problem the change itself, or is it our plan around implementation? What are employees experiencing that leadership may not be seeing? So the reason I think managers are so important, particularly middle managers, is because they see way more than executives do. Has been proven over and over and over again in my experience, and research speaks to it too, right? So where managers don't make the most of that opportunity is when they don't highlight those areas that aren't necessarily visible in the right way. So we want to look for leading indicators. You may not have the final business outcome yet, but you might have evidence of what's moving, what is happening. More employees using the new process, for example, faster adoption, fewer questions, increased participation, improved confidence, fewer errors, better collaboration. This is all qualitative data. And as managers, if we don't account for that in connection to the numbers, sometimes we're telling a story that isn't necessarily a true narrative, and employees know that. And so they just think you don't know what you're doing. And so these are the kind of things that happen in a real world. So create a smaller experiment. So here's what we mean by that. If the big change isn't producing results, shrink the target, right? So instead of we need the entire organization to adopt this, change it to can we demonstrate meaningful improvement in one team, one process, or one behavior over the next 30 days. That's a lot more achievable. It could be a lot more realistic depending on the change you're introducing. It's still a short-term win, and the evidence will be there to either support it or contest it or create some sort of clarity around what is actually happening. Treat failure as data. Don't treat it again as a personal flaw, because that is very likely not what is happening. There is this is where the neuroscience framing really helps, right? To really understand how we navigate these areas where we get stuck, where we become either a guiding light for teams or we become part of the issue. So instead of the change failed, ask the question, what is the change teaching us? What are we learning about this change? The goal is to move the organization from this defensive standpoint. And we've all been there when a change was introduced and everybody's like, this isn't working. I hate this. I want to go back to how we used to do it. That's all normal stuff, right? To curiosity, learning, and adjustment, right? It also puts a little bit of the accountability on employees to share what they're learning and what they're experiencing in a very safe way. Don't reward the wrong behavior. If change isn't working, celebrating activity just because people participated can create a false sense of confidence. That's why you want to make sure that it is measurable. So for example, we trained 500 employees, so we're successful. That's not necessarily true, right? So a better way to frame that is 500 employees completed the training, and now we're measuring whether the new behavior is actually showing up in the job, right? So be as transparent as possible as you're creating these wins to create momentum. No evidence of a win doesn't mean you stop leading. It means you stop pretending. And there's a difference. During change, trust, credibility, stability, predictability, all those things are what actually changes the mindset for people and gets them to partner with you through the change versus push against you. And so I hope some of those things kind of helped you see, right, as a manager, how sometimes we can get in our own way. So here's a management strategy for today. When we think about making change actionable, right, making it practical, making it something that works for all of us. So here's a powerful workshop activity that I want to share with you. Think about a change currently happening in your organization. What is one meaningful win you could create or recognize within the next 30 days? It could be as simple as this when you're designing a win. It has to be honest. It has to be measurable. And so you can fill in these blanks. What is the change? So outline what the change exactly is. Then design a 30-day win. Identify how you will measure it and who needs to see it and how you're going to celebrate it, right? This very practical workshop activity can give you a small win that accelerates momentum along the way, right? Just like in our prior examples. And so as we kind of head towards the end of today, You'll get a brain ready management tool for registering and for participating in today's webinar. And so this tool will cover step 6 for Kotter. And so the Kotter framework, and it'll break down how to get creative around small wins and how to make sure that you're an architect of momentum while you're working through this step. So step 6, very exciting. I'll go ahead and open it up to any questions or comments in chat. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll take a look at our YouTube live stream as well. And if you joined a little bit late, don't worry at all. You will have access to the recording so you could catch the beginning part. I'll go ahead. I don't see any questions or comments, so I'll go ahead and keep going. But as part of our support for our managers out there, accessibility is such an important part of what we do. It's embedded in our values, in my belief system as a CEO and founder. So you're going to get access to the session recording, a copy of this webinar deck. You'll get that change management tool that I talked about. You also have access to check out our training programs through these hyperlinks, access to our management planner, which walks managers through the functions of leadership and management, our neuroscience studies, in case you want to geek out and take a look at how our programs were tested by neuroengineers and neuroscientists. And you always have access to a free consultation with me anytime, even if you're just curious about what we do. And last but definitely not least, we offer month-to-month membership programs that makes it really affordable to be trained and educated all month long in a self-paced kind of way. So with that said, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Next week is going to be the last session, and we're going to be covering making change stick, making it sustainable, and transformation through habit and cultivation with that neuroscience twist. And so we'll touch on the last steps for Kotter's framework, which are step 7 and step 8. So I will catch you next time. Thank you so much for joining. Please follow us on any of our social media channels, and I can't wait to see you next week.